Sit back, take a deep breath, and prepare yourself. Because the story you are about to witness will challenge everything you think you know about love, loyalty, and the invisible hand of fate. This is the story of a young man named Alex, a man who, in the eyes of the materialistic world, had absolutely nothing. He possessed no corporate empire, no luxury vehicles parked in a guarded garage, and not even a modest apartment to call his own. In a society that measures a human being's worth by the weight of their wallet and the prestige of their family name, Alex was an absolute zero, an invisible ghost navigating a city that only bows to the rich. Yet, despite the crushing weight of poverty, despite the empty bank accounts and the constant, echoing silence of unanswered job applications, Alex possessed something that money could never buy, something increasingly rare in a world driven by greed. An unyielding, pure and boundless heart filled with love. It was a bright, shimmering Saturday morning, the kind of day where the sun cuts through the city smog like a golden blade, promising new beginnings. But inside a small, cramped dressing room on the outskirts of the city, the air felt thick with tension. Alex stood frozen in front of a cracked, faded mirror, staring at his own reflection. He was wearing a classic black suit, elegant, perfectly tailored, and impeccably pressed, but it felt less like a garment of celebration and more like a heavy suit of armor he hadn't earned. His hands, rough from years of hard work but currently trembling with an intense, suffocating anxiety, fumbled clumsily as he tried to fix his tie. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of his life. Today was his wedding day. He forced a smile at his own reflection, trying to conjure the joy a groom should feel, but his eyes, deep, dark, and filled with an unbearable vulnerability, told a completely different story. He was terrified. Deep inside his chest, his heart felt like a block of lead, sinking under the immense pressure of his reality. He leaned closer to the glass, his breath fogging the mirror, and whispered to himself in a voice cracked with emotion, saying, "I hope I'm doing the right thing. God, please let me be doing the right thing. I don't have a penny to my name. I don't have a secure future to offer her, but I love her. I really truly love her with everything I am." Suddenly, the heavy wooden door swung open, shattering the heavy silence of the room. His best friend Joseph walked in, a bright, energetic contrast to the gloom hanging over Alex. Joseph was carrying a small digital video camera, its red recording light blinking like a tiny heartbeat. He took one look at Alex and stopped, shaking his head with a mixture of amusement and concern. "My guy, are you still standing here paralyzing yourself in front of the mirror? The bride is down there, she's almost completely ready, and the guests are filling up the rows. Come on, man, pull yourself together," Joseph exclaimed, trying to inject some much-needed energy into the room. Alex let out a hollow, nervous laugh, turning away from his reflection to face the only person who had ever stood by him through his darkest times. He looked at Joseph, his defenses dropping entirely, and asked in a quiet, trembling whisper, "Joe, honestly, do you think I'm making a massive mistake?" Joseph looked at him, utterly confused, his smile fading into a serious expression. "Why on earth would you say that today of all days, Alex? You're marrying Gloria. You're marrying the woman you've loved for years, the woman who chose to walk down the aisle with you." Alex let out a long, heavy sigh, the sound carrying months of suppressed pain. "I understand that, Joe. I know I love her. But luxury is what she's used to. Look around us. Her father paid for absolutely everything. He paid for this grand venue. He paid for the catering. He even paid for this expensive suit I'm wearing right now. I don't even have a stable job, Joe. I'm a qualified building engineer, yes, but on paper I am unemployed. What if I can't give her the life she's used to? What if my love isn't enough to feed her expectations?" Joseph walked closer, his expression softening with deep empathy. He placed a firm, steadying hand on Alex's trembling shoulder, looking straight into his friend's worried eyes. "Listen to me, and listen to me very carefully, Alex. You may not have money right now. You may not have a thriving business or a mountain of gold, but you have something far more valuable. You have a brilliant mind and a profoundly good heart. Gloria sees that brilliance, she sees your potential, and that's exactly why she said yes to you. Stop letting your poverty dictate your worth. Just trust God, and more importantly, trust yourself. Mark my words, brother. One day you'll be the one paying for other people's weddings. One day, the world will see what I see." Alex looked at his friend, a slow, emotional smile breaking through his anxiety, and he whispered, "Amen." Just then, a loud, urgent knock rattled the door, and a coordinator's voice shouted through the wood, "Alex, the bride is coming downstairs right now. It's time. Alex stood up straight, squaring his shoulders as he took a deep, centering breath. He picked up the small velvet black ring box from the table, gripping it like a lifeline, and walked toward the door with Joseph walking proudly beside him. As he opened the door, a chilling thought crossed his mind, a premonition he couldn't shake off as he internally whispered, "Today might be the beautiful beginning of a good life, or it might be the most painful lesson I will ever have to learn." Downstairs, the grand reception hall was a breathtaking sight of opulence and wealth. The massive room was filled to capacity with hundreds of elite guests, all dressed in designer clothes, surrounded by a sea of shimmering gold and pristine white balloons that floated up toward the crystal chandeliers. Exquisite, towering floral arrangements of imported white roses and orchids lined the aisle, filling the air with a sweet, intoxicating scent. Impeccably dressed waiters in tuxedos glided effortlessly through the crowd, carrying silver trays stacked with expensive champagne and gourmet small chops. The atmosphere was buzzing with luxury, a testament to the immense wealth of the bride's family. Suddenly, the live band stopped playing their casual jazz, and a grand classical wedding march began to echo through the massive speakers. The entire crowd went dead silent, turning in unison toward the grand double doors at the back of the hall. The doors swung open, and Gloria stepped into the room. She looked absolutely breathtaking, like a princess stepped out of a royal fairy tale. Her designer wedding dress was a masterpiece of pure white lace, cascading down in a long dramatic train that swept across the polished marble floor with thousands of tiny, shiny crystals hand-sewn around the plunging neckline that caught the light with every step she took. In her hands, she held a tightly bound bouquet of white peonies, her manicured nails catching the glint of the chandeliers. Her makeup was flawless, highlighting her striking features, and her smile was wide and radiant as she greeted the clapping crowd. But to a keen observer, to someone who truly knew how to read human emotion, her eyes told a completely different story. Beneath the heavy mascara and the brilliant smile, her eyes were cold, calculating, and completely detached, looking as though she had a dark, heavy secret weighing on her mind. She walked slowly down the aisle, her arm tightly linked with her father, Mr. Jerry, who was walking with an air of absolute authority and immense pride. Mr. Jerry was a titan of the construction industry, a man whose name carried weight in every corporate boardroom in the city, and he smiled proudly at the high society guests, absorbing their admiration. The soft music swelled as they reached the altar, where Alex stood waiting, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The elderly pastor stood before them, his face etched with a warm, holy serenity as he looked at the young couple. He raised his hands, silencing the crowd, and began the sacred vows. "Do you, Alex, take Gloria to be your lawfully wedded wife, to love and to cherish, in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, until death do you part?" Alex didn't hesitate for a single second. He looked deeply into Gloria's eyes, searching for a reflection of his own devotion, and said with absolute certainty, "Yes, I do, with all my heart and soul." The pastor then turned his gaze to the bride. "Do you, Gloria, take Alex to be your lawfully wedded husband, to love and to cherish, in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, until death do you part?" Gloria paused. For a fraction of a second, a heavy, suffocating silence fell over the altar. She looked around the massive hall, her eyes scanning the wealthy guests before finally meeting her father's stern gaze. "Mr." Jerry gave her a slow, firm nod from the front row, a nod that seemed more like a business approval than a fatherly blessing. Slowly, Gloria turned her head back to Alex, the warmth completely absent from her eyes as she spoke the words, "Yes, I do." The pastor smiled, raising his hands high above them. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may now kiss the bride." The entire hall erupted into a frenzy of loud applause and cheers. Guests stood up dancing in their chairs, while older relatives wiped tears of joy from their eyes. The camera lights kept flashing continuously, capturing every angle of the beautiful couple. Alex reached out and held Gloria's hand tightly, feeling a sudden surge of overwhelming gratitude. His smile was wide, stretching across his face, but his heart was still deeply bothered by an underlying sense of unworthiness. He leaned close to her ear, inhaling her expensive perfume, and whispered softly, Thank you for choosing me, Gloria, even when I have absolutely nothing to my name." Gloria didn't hug him tighter. She simply gave a small, polite, and hollow smile, her eyes already looking past him toward the crowd. Alex was ready to love her with everything he had, ready to lay down his life for her, completely blind to the fact that all he had to offer her was hope, and in Gloria's world, hope was a currency that held absolutely no value. Exactly 2 months later, the illusion of marital bliss had completely shattered, replaced by the cold reality of social inequality. Gloria sat in her father's grand top-floor executive office, the walls lined with mahogany and awards, laughing loudly as she swiveled in a plush leather chair. She looked every bit the billionaire's daughter, wearing a brand new, tailored red designer dress complemented by heavy gold earrings that jingled with every movement of her head. Her nails were long, acrylic, and painted a shiny, reflective chrome. She looked rich, she felt rich, and she was entirely in her element. Her father, Mr. Jerry, sat across the massive glass desk, looking at her with an expression of immense satisfaction. He pushed a thick, heavy leather file across the table toward her. "Sign right here, my dear," he said, his voice brimming with corporate authority. "I believe this role of executive assistant to the CEO is the perfect, indispensable stepping stone for you. As my right-hand person in Jerrycon Engineering, you'll be directly involved in all daily operations, attend our most critical boardroom meetings, and gain deep insight into strategic planning and high-stakes decision-making processes. You'll learn the ropes directly from me and the rest of the executive team, and I truly believe you'll be well prepared to completely take over this entire empire when the time comes for me to step down. I want you to sign on for this role today and make the absolute most of it. It's going to be a fantastic, unparalleled opportunity for your professional growth and learning." Gloria picked up the expensive gold pen, her smile wide and victorious as she signed her name on the dotted line. "Daddy, thank you so much for everything. You've made life and work so incredibly easy for me," she purred, soaking in the nepotism. Mr. Jerry smiled back, a paternal warmth in his eyes. "Of course, sweetheart. You're my only child, the sole heir to everything I've built. You deserve nothing but the absolute best this world has to offer." Meanwhile, miles away from the air-conditioned towers of the rich, Alex sat alone in the dim, stifling living room of the modest apartment they shared. The old ceiling fan was blowing slowly, making a rhythmic, scraping sound against the heat. His laptop was resting heavily on his bare legs, its screen illuminating his exhausted, pale face. His eyes were bloodshot, surrounded by dark circles from days of sleeplessness. He had just clicked the send button on his 10th detailed business email for the day. "Please find attached my comprehensive architectural proposal," he muttered under his breath. He stopped typing, rubbing his temples, and looked around the empty, quiet, and freezing cold room. The contrast between his wife's daily life and his own was a chasm that was growing wider by the second. He dropped his head back against the couch, clasped his hands together, and whispered into the empty room, "God, please, just give me one yes. Just one single approved contract will go such a long way to fixing my life, to saving my marriage. Please." In the very beginning of their marriage, Gloria had played the part of the sweet, supportive wife. She would cook nice meals for Alex, sit close beside him on the couch, and rub his back while saying in a soothing tone, "Don't worry, my love. Things will get better, you'll see. Your talent won't be hidden forever." But that sweet, comforting voice didn't last past the first 6 weeks. The mask of the loving was slipping rapidly, revealing a cruel, impatient antagonist who despised weakness. One hot morning, Alex was still in bed, the fan turning uselessly above him. His laptop was open, resting on his lap as it always did. He wasn't watching mind-boggling films. He wasn't playing childish video games. He was desperately searching. He clicked through endless civil engineering forums, refreshed corporate building project sites, and meticulously checked his spam folders. He was hoping against hope that maybe, just maybe, one company had replied to his brilliant designs. Maybe today would be the day a major firm would call him for a multi-million-dollar building contract. But his inbox remained stubbornly, devastatingly empty. Suddenly, the bedroom door flew open, and Gloria walked in, fully dressed for her executive job at her father's company. Her hair was packed into a neat, tight, authoritative bun, and the sharp, overwhelming scent of her expensive French perfume instantly filled the small room, masking the smell of Alex's anxiety. She stood at the foot of the bed, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, staring down at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "You're still in bed?" she asked, her voice cutting through the quiet room like a sharp shard of glass. Alex looked up, startled, trying to adjust his glasses. "Gloria, I've been awake since 4 a.m. I've sent out some major proposals this morning. Look, there's this massive new school building project happening in Isia, and I just applied for it. My designs are flawless, I truly believe." Gloria cut him off, letting out a loud, cold, and mocking laugh that shattered his remaining dignity. Alex, please, every single week you talk about new projects. Every single day it's the same old story. I applied for this, or I submitted a bid for that, but absolutely nothing ever comes out of it. It's all words, Alex. Just endless, useless words. Alex sat up slowly, the heavy weight of humiliation pressing down on his chest. He kept his voice low, trying desperately to maintain a shred of his manhood. Gloria, you know how this industry works. I am a highly trained building engineer. Contracts don't just fall from the sky into your lap overnight. It takes time to build a reputation. It takes time to get noticed by the big players. Gloria snapped instantly, her eyes flashing with a dangerous aristocratic anger. Time? You're talking to me about time? It has been months since we got married, Alex. Look at your track record. How many construction sites have you actually worked on since I became your wife? 0. Not a single one. You just sit here all day in your pajamas, clicking a mouse and hoping for miracles, while I am forced to go out into the real world and work hard every single day to maintain an image. Alex's mouth went completely dry, his heart aching from the sheer injustice of her words, but he still tried to defend his honor. Gloria, please look at me. I am not a lazy man. You met me working hard. You know I am dedicated. I just need a breakthrough. Gloria threw her hands up in the air, a gesture of complete dismissal. All I know, Alex, is that I am utterly, completely tired. I am tired of being the one who pays the electricity bills. I am tired of pretending to my high society friends that everything is fine. I am tired of being the man in this house while you play the victim. She spun around on her expensive heels and slammed the door behind her, leaving Alex staring at the cold laptop screen. The words on the monitor didn't matter anymore. The formulas and blueprints blurred before his eyes. He slowly closed the laptop lid, the clicking sound final. The heavy, suffocating silence of the room pressed down on his chest like a physical weight. He was a man of skill, a man of immense talent, but right now, in his own home, under the roof paid for by his wife's family, he felt completely useless. Something deep inside his soul, something fundamental to his identity, started to crack and break under the weight of her cruelty. That same evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and threw long, bloody shadows across the living room, the doorbell rang. Alex dragged himself up and opened the door, and there stood his childhood friend, Joseph. Ah, my brother! Joseph smiled wide, his face radiating warmth as he held up a large nylon bag full of local snacks and cold drinks. Joe, Alex breathed out, a genuine smile breaking across his tired face for the first time in what felt like centuries. You didn't even tell me you were coming over. A surprise visit, my guy, Joseph said, stepping into the apartment and sensing the heavy aura instantly. I brought some snacks and cold malt. Let's sit down, disconnect from the world, and catch up properly. They sat together in the dimly lit living room, the ceiling fan making its soft, repetitive whirring sound above them. The television was off, leaving the room in a state of vulnerable quiet. Joseph passed a snack over to Alex, staring intensely at his friend's gaunt appearance. Eat, man. Seriously, eat. You look like someone who hasn't smiled or had a good meal in months. What is going on with you? Alex took the food but just held it listlessly in his hand, letting out a weak, hollow laugh. It's not easy, Joe. Life is just incredibly hard these days. The doors are just firmly shut against me. Joseph nodded, his eyes filled with genuine brotherhood empathy. I know, Alex. I've been in that dark ditch before, but you cannot give up now, man. You are brilliant. You are one of the smartest engineers I know. One day, mark my words, everything will completely turn around for you. Alex looked down at his worn-out carpet, his voice dropping to a broken whisper. Gloria doesn't believe in me anymore, Joe. She talks to me like I'm a piece of garbage on the street. She treats me like I am nothing. Joseph sat up straight, his expression turning fierce with loyalty. Listen to me, Alex. Just keep pushing forward. You don't need 10 people, or 100 people, or even your wife to believe in you right now. You just need one single person to hold the faith, and I am telling you, I believe in you with everything I have. Alex looked up, his eyes turning red as unshed tears welled up, a wave of gratitude washing over him. But before he could reply, the front door rattled open with a violent twist of the key, and Gloria walked straight into the living room. Her designer handbag was slung over her arm, her face tight with irritation. She stopped dead in her tracks, her arms instantly crossing over her chest as she took in these. So, this is exactly what you do when I am out slaving away at the office, she said, her voice dripping with venom. You sit around in my living room with your equally jobless friend. eating cheap snacks and wasting electricity. Joseph stood up immediately, completely caught off guard by her hostility, trying to maintain politeness. Ah, good evening, Gloria. I just came by to check on. Gloria completely ignored him, turning her piercing, hateful gaze directly onto her husband. Alex, do you even possess a single shred of shame? Look at you. You're here laughing and socializing like everything is perfectly fine in your life, while you haven't contributed a single penny to this household in months. Alex stood up slowly, his body trembling with a mixture of anger and humiliation. Gloria, please stop. This is Joseph. He is my best friend, my brother. He only came here to check on my mental health, to support me. Gloria let out a loud, theatrical hiss of disgust and walked away toward the kitchen, tossing her bags onto the counter. Joseph turned slowly to face Alex, his face pale with shock. Is this, Alex? Is this how she talks to you every single day? Alex couldn't even look his friend in the eye. He said absolutely nothing. He just collapsed back onto the couch, covering his face with his hands. Joseph stood over his friend for a long, agonizing time, his heart breaking for the man Alex used to be. Alex, you need to do something, and you need to do it fast, or this woman will completely finish you. She will destroy your soul. Alex simply nodded his head slowly, his eyes deceptively calm, but deep inside his chest, a dangerous, unyielding fire had started to burn. That night, the bedroom was entirely quiet, wrapped in a thick, toxic darkness. The lights were turned off, but the emotional pain in the room was blinding. Alex sat on the very edge of the mattress, his feet touching the cold floor. Gloria was already lying down on the opposite side of the bed, her back turned completely toward him, facing the wall like a cold stone statue. He took a deep, shaky breath, gathering every ounce of courage he had left, and spoke softly into the dark. Gloria, please, I want us to talk, sincerely. There was no answer, just the sound of her steady breathing. Please, Alex continued, his voice cracking. What you said today, what you did in front of Joseph, it completely broke me. You humiliated me in front of the only person who respects me. Still, there was absolutely no answer from the shadow across the bed. You laughed at my struggles, Gloria. You called me weak and useless in front of my friend. I am your husband. I deserve protection, not public execution. Suddenly, Gloria spun around fiercely to face him, sitting up in the dark, her voice sharp as a razor blade. Oh, so now I can't even speak the truth in my own house because your little friend was here to witness it? Is that it? Alex looked at her silhouette, his eyes low and defeated. That's not it at all, Gloria. I just want you to believe in me, the way you did when we were dating. You know how hard I am trying. Every single day I am putting myself out there, sending out proposals, following up on leads. It is incredibly brutal out there for an independent contractor. He paused, swallowing the last of his pride, and added in a desperate, pleading tone, maybe, just maybe, Gloria, you could talk to your dad, Mr. Jerry knows all the biggest developers in the country. If he could just help me secure one single small subcontract, just one foot in the door, I swear to you I will work day and night to prove my worth to him and to you. Gloria sat up completely at once, letting out a sharp, mocking gasp that sounded like a siren in the quiet room. So that's your grand plan, isn't it? She shouted loudly, her voice echoing off the walls. This is the real reason you married me, right? You didn't marry me for love, Alex. You married me for my father's corporate connections. You wanted a shortcut to wealth. Alex looked at her, utterly shocked, his heart shattering at the monstrous accusation. No, Gloria, how can you say that? I love you. I have always loved you. I am only asking for a professional chance, a tiny lifeline from a family that has abundance. Keep your pathetic chances to yourself, she screamed at the top of her lungs, completely unbothered by his pain. You want to use my father to climb the ladder now? You honestly think a titan like Mr. Jerry is just going to hand a multi-million-dollar contract to a broke, failing man just because he happened to marry his daughter? You are delusional, Alex. Alex tried to reach out in the dark to hold her hand, to calm her down, but she pulled away violently, as if his touch was contaminated with poverty. I deeply regret ever saying anything to you, Alex said quietly, his voice completely dead, all the fight leaving his body. Gloria hissed loudly, turning her back to him once again, and pulled the heavy designer blanket over her shoulder with an aggressive yank. Next time, think before you speak your poverty into my ears. She snapped coldly, closing her eyes. Alex sat there entirely alone in the darkness, staring at the blank wall. His chest felt impossibly heavy. His heart was profoundly tired, and that night, sleep did not come to him at all. leaving him awake to watch the shadows stretch across the room as he realized he was completely alone in his struggle. Trapped in a marriage that had become a prison of absolute disdain, holding on to a ticking time bomb that was waiting to explode and change the course of his destiny forever. One grueling week crawled by, and the atmosphere inside the small apartment grew heavier, suffocating any remaining trace of warmth between the couple. The house had become a battlefield of silence, a place where words were traded only when absolutely necessary, and always with a razor-sharp edge. Gloria moved through the rooms like a landlord dealing with an unwanted tenant, her eyes carefully avoiding Alex whenever they crossed paths. Alex spent nearly every waking hour confined to the small study corner in the living room, huddled over his laptop, desperately refining blueprints, double-checking cost estimates, and sending out proposal after proposal into the digital void. His fingers flew across the keyboard with a frantic, desperate energy, fueled by the fading hope that professional redemption could save his dying marriage. Then, on a Tuesday morning that felt just as bleak as the days before it, his phone suddenly vibrated on the desk, shattering the heavy quiet. The screen lit up with the name Joseph. Alex picked it up quickly, pressing it to his ear. "Hello, bros," he said, trying to inject some life into his tired voice. "Guy." Joseph's voice erupted through the speaker, so loud and overflowing with pure, unadulterated joy that Alex had to pull the phone back a few inches. "I have news. Big, monumental news, my brother." Alex felt a rare smile touch his lips, genuinely happy to hear excitement from the one person who hadn't abandoned him. "Tell me, Joe, I'm ready for some good news." "What happened?" Joseph let out an ecstatic shout on the other end. "I got the job, Alex. That major international firm I told you about last month, the one with the rigorous screening process. They picked me. I signed the contract yesterday afternoon." Alex's smile widened, a surge of pride for his friend washing away his own gloom for a fleeting moment. "Joseph, that is absolutely amazing. I am so incredibly happy for you, man. You worked so hard." "Wait, hold on, that's not even all of it." Joseph laughed, his voice trembling with disbelief. "They gave me a brand new official car, straight from the dealership, and guess what else, Alex? I also got a fully paid, luxury 2-bedroom apartment in the heart of Lecky, as part of my sign-on package." Alex's hand completely froze on the phone, the plastic casing suddenly feeling cold against his palm. For a second the room seemed to spin, and the air left his lungs. The contrast between his best friend's rapid ascent and his own devastating stagnation hit him like a physical blow. His voice came out slow, forced, and hollow, thick with a complex mixture of genuine happiness and deep, agonizing envy. "Wow, bro, this is incredibly big. I am really truly proud of you. You deserve every bit of it." Joseph, picking up on the subtle shift in his friend's tone, spoke with fiercest encouragement. "You're next, man. I swear to you, Alex, your time is coming. I believe in you with everything I have. Just keep pushing. Don't let that environment destroy your spirit." Alex nodded slowly, staring blankly at his outdated laptop screen, even though Joseph couldn't see him. "Thanks, Joe. Thank you so much." They ended the call and Alex slowly lowered the phone, placing it face down on the desk. He looked around the quiet, fading room, the silence pressing into his ears. He was happy for his friend. He truly, deeply was. But deep inside the dark corners of his mind, something else was growing. Something quiet, something heavy and profoundly sad. It was the crushing realization of his own failure. He looked back at his laptop. The screen was still open, the cursor blinking steadily in an empty text field, waiting for words that refused to come. Alex sat back, letting his head fall against the chair and closed his eyes tightly. He whispered into the empty room, "When will it be my turn, God? When is my breakthrough coming?" And once again, as it had for months, only the hollow hum of the ceiling fan answered him. The next morning arrived, a bright, scorching Monday that seemed to demand action. Alex woke up with a renewed, desperate determination burning in his chest. He was determined to make this day different. He washed his face, shaved with a shaking hand, and put on his cleanest, most professional shirt. He sprayed a few drops of his remaining good perfume, looked at his reflection in the mirror, and tried to summon the confidence of the engineer he used to be. Today was crucial. He picked up his leather file, stuffed to the brim with detailed architectural drawings, structural calculations, and building proposals. He had managed to secure a face-to-face meeting with a major construction firm downtown, a meeting he knew could completely alter the trajectory of his life. He walked out to the garage, his boots echoing on the concrete, and stopped in front of Gloria's second car, a sleek silver sedan that rarely left the driveway. as she always drove her luxury SUV to her father's office. Alex had never touched her vehicles without asking permission first. He knew the strict boundaries she had drawn around her wealth, but today she had already left for work hours ago. The meeting was scheduled for the exact peak of morning traffic, and he couldn't afford to arrive late and look unprofessional. He took a deep, centering breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. Just for today, he whispered to himself, balancing the risk. Just to secure this contract, then I'll bring it right back. He opened the door, slid into the leather driver's seat, and turned the key. The engine roared to life and his anxiety spiked. As he pulled out of the gate and merged into the chaotic city traffic, he began to pray aloud, his voice shaking. God, please let today be different. Please open their eyes to see the value in my designs. Let them just give me a single chance to prove myself. He navigated the gridlock with frantic precision, arriving at the corporate headquarters of the construction company at exactly 10 light a.m. The security guard checked his credentials and signaled for the heavy gates to open. Alex parked the sedan, stepped out, and smoothed down his shirt. With a chest full of fragile hope and his leather file gripped tightly under his arm, he walked through the glass doors, telling himself, today is the day everything changes. Minutes later, Alex was seated in a pristine, sunlit office on the 4th floor. Across the polished mahogany table sat Mr. Adabio, a stern, middle-aged man who served as the director of major projects, a man known for his zero-tolerance policy toward incompetence. Alex, pushing past his nerves, leaned forward, a bright, confident smile on his face as he opened his file. Sir, Alex spoke with a steady, commanding tone that surprised even himself. My proposal doesn't just focus on aesthetic appeal. It covers cost efficiency, maximum safety regulations, and rapid execution speed. I've successfully overseen substantial residential structures in the past, and I assure you, if your firm grants me this contract, you will not regret it for a single moment. My structural integrity models are Mr. Adabio looked through the printed blueprints, nodding slowly, a look of genuine impression crossing his stern features. Not bad at all, young man. Your calculations regarding foundation reinforcement are quite impressive. Just as the director was about to praise the design further, a sharp, loud ringing tone cut through the professional atmosphere. Alex's heart stopped. He glanced down at his pocket. His phone was lighting up. The screen displayed Gloria's name in bold letters. Sweat broke out on the back of his neck. He quickly reached down, slid his hand into his pocket, and pressed the silent button, cutting off the noise. I am incredibly sorry, sir. Please continue, Alex said, his smile turning tight and anxious. Miss Adabio raised a single critical eyebrow, pausing for a moment before looking back down at the papers. As I was saying, your material cost breakdown is... Before the director could finish his sentence, the phone began to vibrate violently against the wood of the table, the buzzing sound echoing loudly in the quiet room. Alex's face flushed a deep crimson. He pulled the phone out, his fingers fumbling as he rapidly hit the decline button, thrusting it back into his pocket. My deepest apologies, Mr. Adabio. Please, let's focus on the structural timeline, Alex pleaded, his voice carrying a subtle trace of panic. Mr. Adabio leaned back in his leather chair, his expression tightening into a cold, irritated frown. Is everything all right, young man? A professional should know to silence their devices before entering an executive meeting. Yes, sir, everything is perfectly fine. It's just my wife, sir, Alex said, forcing a small, hollow laugh, trying to minimize the intrusion. Mr. Adabio let out a disapproving grunt and looked back at the file. But, before he could even read a single line, the phone rang again, then again, and again. It was a relentless, aggressive bombardment of calls, the screen flashing consecutively without a second of relief. Gloria was calling him like a woman possessed. Alex felt cold sweat pouring down his forehead, dripping onto his clean collar. The professional demeanor he had carefully built over the last 20 minutes was completely disintegrating. Mr. Adabio slammed the leather folder shut with a loud echoing thud, standing up from his chair with a look of absolute disgust. Is this how you intend to handle serious corporate meetings, Mr. Alex? If you cannot even exercise basic control over your personal telephone, how on earth do you expect me to trust you with the management of a multi-million-dollar building site with hundreds of laborers? Alex jumped to his feet instantly, his hands shaking so hard he almost dropped his pen. Sir, please, I beg of you, give me just one more minute. I can explain the situation. It's an absolute emergency at home, please. But Mr. Adabio simply extended a rigid arm, pointing his index finger squarely at the glass door. You are completely unserious, young man. This firm does not do business with amateurs who lack basic corporate etiquette. Please leave my office immediately. Alex stood frozen, the floor feeling as though it were collapsing beneath him. Sir, please. I said leave, Mr. Adabio shouted, his voice booming through the room. Alex slowly, mechanically gathered his blueprints, stuffing them back into his file with numb, unfeeling fingers. He turned around, his legs feeling like lead weights, and walked out of the office. His hands were shaking violently, a profound, hollow sickness settling into his stomach. When he reached the corridor, he pulled out his phone with a hand that wouldn't stop trembling. He looked at the screen. There were 15 consecutive missed calls from his wife. Alex stepped out of the grand corporate gate, the heat of the midday sun hitting his face, but he felt entirely cold inside. He stood beside the silver sedan, leaning against the warm metal, his eyes bloodshot and swimming with hot tears of frustration. Suddenly, the phone in his hand began to ring yet again. It was Gloria. This time, his restraint broke, and he swiped the screen aggressively, pressing the phone to his ear. Before he could even draw a breath, her voice came crashing through the speaker like a physical slap, loud, hysterical, and dripping with raw, unchecked anger. What is wrong with you, you worthless thief? Why did you take my car? Who gave you the permission to touch my property? Alex tried with everything inside him to maintain a shred of composure, his voice shaking as he spoke into the microphone. Gloria, please calm down for a second and listen to me. I had a meeting, a massive, career-defining meeting downtown. The traffic was intense, and I absolutely could not be late if I wanted to be taken seriously. That is the only reason I used it. Just for a few hours, Gloria. I was going to bring it right back. Don't you ever touch anything that belongs to me again, she screamed back, her voice screeching through the phone so loudly that a passerby turned to look at Alex. Are you my personal driver? If you need a vehicle so badly, why don't you get off your lazy behind, find a real job, and buy your own? You have no right to touch my things. Alex's voice cracked completely, months of suppressed humiliation finally bubbling to the surface in a desperate emotional cry. Do you have any idea what you just did to me, Gloria? Do you know what you just ruined? That meeting was the most important moment of my professional life. I was this close to securing a contract worth millions of naira. But your endless, psychotic calling, it completely ruined everything. The director thought I was a joke. You made me lose the contract, Gloria. You made me lose everything today. Gloria let out a cruel, mocking laugh on the other end, a sound that chilled Alex to the bone. Oh, so now it's my fault that you're an absolute failure? It's my fault that you can't handle a simple interview? Typical. Always looking for someone else to blame for your own worthlessness. Alex let out a broken, agonizing sigh, a tear finally escaping and running down his cheek. I am trying, Gloria. I am trying so hard every single day. I just needed my wife's support, just a little bit of grace. Support yourself, Alex, but do it with your own things, not with my hard-earned luxury, she hissed loudly, the venom in her voice palpable, before abruptly ending the call. Alex stood entirely still in the middle of the bustling street, the dial tone buzzing in his ear like a hornet. He looked up at the vast, uncaring blue sky, then down at the cracked concrete beneath his feet, utterly shattered. He didn't know which pain cut deeper into his soul, the devastating loss of the life-changing contract, or the horrific realization that the woman he loved looked at him like he was absolute trash. That evening, the sun had long set, leaving the city draped in a dark, ominous gloom. Alex opened the front door to the apartment slowly, his body aching from the sheer weight of his depression. As soon as he stepped into the sitting room, he found Gloria standing in the center of the space, her arms folded tightly across her chest, her eyes sharp and gleaming with a predatory anger. Before he could even close the door behind him or utter a syllable of greeting, she barked across the room. Where are my car keys? Alex, his eyes dull and lifeless, reached into his trouser pocket and pulled out the metal key fob. Before he could even extend his arm fully, Gloria lunged forward and snatched it violently out of his hand, her long chrome nail scratching his palm. Don't you ever touch anything that belongs to me again for the rest of your miserable life, she screamed, her face contorted with rage. Alex looked at her, his voice coming out in a whisper that carried the profound exhaustion of his soul. Why? Why are you treating me like this, Gloria? What did I ever do to you to deserve this kind of emotional torture? I am your husband. Gloria stepped even closer, her breath hot against his face, completely devoid of any marital affection. You want to know why, Alex? Because you married me and brought nothing but absolute shame and embarrassment into my life. My high society friends laugh at me behind my back because of you. They ask me what my husband does, and I have to lie because I am too embarrassed to tell them I married a broke beggar." For the first time in their entire relationship, something snapped inside Alex, and he raised his voice, a deep, resonant boom that echoed through the small apartment. "I did not marry you for your father's money, Gloria. I didn't marry you for your social status. I married you because I loved you with every fiber of my being. I married the woman I thought you were." "Then maybe you should have married someone as pathetically poor as you," she screamed back, her voice reaching a hysterical pitch. The argument erupted into a volatile storm of words, the air in the room thick with hatred. Alex, feeling himself losing control, turned his back to her, trying to walk away to calm his raging heart. But then Gloria did something so monstrous, so utterly dehumanizing, that time itself seemed to violently stop. She stepped up behind him, let out a venomous sneer, and spat directly onto his face. The wet impact hit his cheek, sliding down his jawline. The entire world went dead silent. The ticking of the wall clock seemed to freeze. Alex stood perfectly still, his back still turned to her. Slowly, methodically, he raised his shaking hand and wiped the saliva from his face, looking at the moisture on his fingers. A dark, terrifying stillness washed over him. He slowly turned around to face her, his right hand rising halfway into the air, his muscles tensing, a primal urge to strike back surging through his veins. Gloria didn't even flinch. She stood her ground, a wicked, triumphant smile spreading across her painted lips as she taunted him. "Go ahead, Alex. Touch me. Just try it. Touch me, and I will personally ensure you spend the rest of your miserable days rotting in a jail cell. My father has the police in his pocket. He will make sure you disappear forever. You are nothing." Alex looked deep into her eyes, searching one last time for a shred of the woman he had sworn to protect at the altar. There was nothing there. No fear, no love, no pity, no humanity. Only a cold, aristocratic monster who despised his very existence. He slowly lowered his shaking hand, stepping back away from her as if she were a venomous serpent. Without saying a single word, his face an emotionless mask of profound betrayal, he turned around and walked into the bedroom, closing the door behind him. That night, he didn't lie down. He sat on the edge of the bed in the pitch black, staring up at the ceiling, tears silently leaking from his eyes, as he wondered how the beautiful girl he loved had transformed into this demon, and how a holy covenant had turned into a living hell. The following morning, the sun rose over the city, but it brought no warmth into the apartment. Alex sat at the small dining table, his laptop open before him. He had been awake since 3 a.m., his mind trapped in a loop of humiliation. He hadn't eaten a single bite of food, he hadn't bathed, and his clothes were wrinkled. His eyes were entirely bloodshot, staring intensely at the bright screen as he scrolled through endless job boards, sending message after message, hunting for any scrap of engineering work online. He was a man running out of time, running out of options. He whispered to himself in a cracked, broken voice, "Just one good job, just one single breakthrough, God. Please, remember me in this wilderness." Suddenly, a loud, violent explosion of noise shattered the morning quiet. It wasn't a polite knock, it was a furious, aggressive pounding that made the wooden front door rattle violently in its frame. The force of the blows shook the entire wall. Alex stood up slowly, a cold, icy dread instantly settling into his stomach. His hands went completely numb. He walked to the window and pulled the curtain back just an inch to peer outside. What he saw made his heart leap into his throat, his breath catching in a knot of sheer terror. 3 men stood on the porch. In the center was Mr. Jerry, Gloria's father, his face flushed red with a terrifying patriarchal rage. Flanking him on either side were 2 heavily armed military soldiers, dressed in camouflage uniforms, their faces carved from stone, their eyes filled with a brutal, unfeeling authority. Alex's mind raced in confusion as he slowly unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door. Before he could even open his mouth to speak, Mr. Jerry stepped forward, pointing a thick, aggressive finger straight into Alex's face, his voice booming like thunder through the quiet neighborhood. "So you miserable scoundrel, you think you can lay your filthy, impoverished hands on my daughter? You think you can beat her in my house?" Alex's eyes went wide with absolute shock, his hands flying up in a gesture of innocence. "What? No, sir, I swear to Almighty God, I didn't touch her. I have never laid a hand on Gloria." "She is lying to you, sir, please." But before the words could fully leave his mouth, the 2 soldiers moved with brutal military precision. They lunged forward, reaching the threshold of his home. One soldier violently grabbed Alex's left arm, twisting it behind his back, while the other seized the collar of his shirt, lifting him nearly off his feet. Alex shouted out in terror, "Wait! Stop! I didn't do anything! Please, let me explain!" "Gloria, tell them the truth." But his cries fell on entirely deaf ears. The soldiers brutally dragged him out of the apartment, his feet scraping against the floorboards. As they threw him onto the gravel driveway, Alex looked up through his blurred vision and saw Gloria standing by her luxury SUV. She was holding her phone, casually scrolling through her screen, completely unbothered by the violence unfolding before her. She didn't even cast a single glance at her husband as he was being manhandled. Alex kept begging, his voice cracking with emotion as he was shoved toward a military vehicle. "Please, Daddy, sir, please listen to me. I am an innocent man. Gloria is fabricating this to destroy me, mister." Jerry didn't even look back. He simply turned around, got into his luxury car, and drove away without a single word of mercy. The soldiers threw Alex into the back of their vehicle and drove him straight to the military barracks. There, the nightmare truly began. They dragged him into an open courtyard under the scorching, unforgiving sun and ordered him to kneel on the jagged gravel. When he tried to speak, a soldier kicked him heavily in the ribs, sending him sprawling into the dust. "Shut up, boy," they shouted. They poured buckets of freezing cold, filthy water over his head, blinding him, and then forced him to perform brutal, exhausting physical tasks under the blazing heat until his muscles screamed in agony. They shoved him into the dirt, making him crawl on his stomach like an animal through the mud, mocking his education and his poverty. Throughout the entire ordeal, Alex didn't scream. He didn't fight back, and he didn't beg them for mercy anymore. He simply endured the physical torment in a state of catatonic shock. But deep inside his chest, his heart wasn't just broken, it was completely pulverized. Hot tears of absolute betrayal mixed with the dirty water and sweat running down his swollen face. He wasn't crying from the physical pain of the blows. He was crying from the agonizing realization of what his wife had done to him. How can someone I loved so deeply do something so horrific to me?" he whispered into the dirt, his voice swallowed by the harsh laughter of the soldiers. Nobody answered him. That day, in the dust of the military barracks, Alex lost something fundamental inside his soul. A part of his innocence, a part of his capacity to trust, died right there, never to return. 3 agonizing days later, the soldiers finally dumped Alex back on the street near his apartment like a bag of garbage. He dragged himself toward the front door, his steps slow, halting, and agonizingly painful. His lips were severely chapped and dry from dehydration. His face was heavily swollen and covered in dark purple bruises, and his arms and torso were wrapped in crude white bandages to cover the open cuts from the gravel. He looked like a man who had survived a war zone. He pushed the front door open with a weak, trembling hand and walked into the sitting room. Gloria was right there, sitting comfortably on the plush leather couch, casually pressing her phone and sipping from a glass of juice. Alex stood in front of her, his broken body casting a shadow over her. His voice came out incredibly low, a raspy whisper, but his heart was screaming with a desperate need for answers.
"Why?"
"Why did you lie to your father, Gloria?" he asked, his voice trembling with an intense, quiet pain. "Why did you do this horrific thing to me? Look at what you did to my body. Why?" Gloria slowly looked up from her phone screen. There was no look of horror on her face when she saw his broken state. There was no apology, no tears, no sudden rush of marital guilt. She didn't even bother to stand up from the comfort of her couch. Instead, she reached onto the glass coffee table, picked up a thick, pristine white envelope, and threw it violently directly at his bruised face. The paper hit his swollen cheek and fluttered down to the floor between his feet. "Sign it," she said, her voice completely flat, cold, and devoid of any human emotion. "I have already filed for an absolute divorce. Pack your pathetic things and leave my house today. I am officially done with you." Alex stood perfectly still, the words washing over him like ice water. He slowly bent down, his bruised muscles groaning in pain, and picked up the envelope. He opened it with trembling fingers. It was indeed legal divorce papers, already stamped by a high court judge her father undoubtedly paid off. He looked up at her one final time, his eyes desperately searching her face, hoping against hope to see a flicker of the girl he had married, a single tear of regret, a hidden sign of love. But there was absolutely nothing there. There was only a cold, rigid anger on her face and a deep, burning hatred in her eyes. In that exact moment, Alex knew the truth. This monster standing before him was not his wife anymore. This was the absolute tragic end of their love. Alex walked into the bedroom and packed his things slowly, methodically, utilizing just one single, small canvas duffel bag. He didn't take much because he didn't own much, but he deliberately left behind the expensive gold watch she had bought him for his birthday during their first month of marriage. He dropped the expensive French perfume she had once gifted him onto the nightstand. He didn't want a single item, a single scent, or a single memory that would ever remind him of her existence or the hell he had endured. He zipped the bag, slung it over his injured shoulder, and walked back out to the front door. Before he stepped over the threshold into the unknown, he paused, turned around, and looked at Gloria one last time as she sat on the couch. She didn't even have the decency to look back at him. She simply picked up the remote control and changed the television channel to a reality show, completely erasing him from her life. Alex walked out, slamming the door behind him. The sky outside looked dark and heavily overcast, as if it were about to unleash a massive storm, and the street was completely quiet. He stood on the pavement, dropped his bag, and brought out his phone with a hand that was shaking uncontrollably. He dialed a number he knew by heart. It rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "Hello? Alex?" It was Joseph. Alex cleared his tight throat, fighting back a wave of emotion, and said in a strained, tight voice, "Joe, please, can I stay at your place for a little while?" Joseph instantly detected the trauma in his friend's voice, his tone shifting to one of extreme alarm. "What happened, Alex? Where are you? Are you okay?" Alex looked around the empty, hostile street, his eyes burning red, but he forced his voice to remain flat. "I'll explain everything when I get to your place, Joe." Joseph didn't hesitate for a single second. "Come right now, brother. My door is always open for you. Always." Alex picked up his small bag and started walking down the cracked pavement, his body aching with every step. He had no money, no home, no wife, and no idea what tomorrow would bring. But as he wiped a stray tear from his bruised cheek, a dark, unbreakable resolve began to solidify deep within his soul. He knew this was the absolute rock bottom of his life, a brutal, painful beginning of a completely new existence. But deep inside, a tiny, unyielding voice whispered that his story wasn't over yet, and the world wasn't ready for the man he was about to become. The frantic sound of Joseph's footsteps echoed through his apartment as he rushed to answer the sudden, heavy knock at the front door. He threw it open, expecting a routine delivery or a neighbor, but the moment his eyes fell upon the figure standing on his welcome mat, his entire body froze in sheer, unadulterated horror. Alex stood there, his frame slumped, his face heavily swollen with dark purple and yellowish bruises that distorted his features. Crude white bandages wrapped around his arms and torso were stained with dried sweat and dust, and his clothes were torn and covered in dirt from the military barracks. Joseph's mouth opened wide, his breath catching in his throat as a cold shock washed over him. "Alex! Oh my God, Alex, what on earth happened to you?" Joseph cried out, his voice cracking with immense alarm. Alex didn't have the strength to speak, his lips were dry and cracked, bleeding slightly as he moved his jaw. He simply walked past his friend slowly, mechanically, and collapsed onto the living room couch like a puppet whose strings had been violently cut. Joseph slammed the heavy front door shut, locking it instantly, and ran to sit beside his broken brother, his eyes welling with tears of anger and confusion. "Talk to me, man, please. Tell me who did this horrific thing to you. I will call the police right now." Alex slowly looked up, his eyes dull, hollow, and completely emptied of the light they once possessed. He reached out with a trembling hand, gripping Joseph's forearm, and spoke in a raspy, broken whisper. "I didn't touch her, Joseph. I swear to Almighty God, I never laid a single finger on her. But she lied to her father. She told him I beat her. Mr. Jerry sent armed military soldiers to our apartment. They dragged me out like a common criminal, Joe. They took me to the barracks, tied me up in the dirt, and beat me until I couldn't breathe. They treated me like a worthless animal." Joseph's tears finally spilled over his eyelids, his teeth grinding in an absolute fury at the sheer injustice of it all. "Those monsters! Those absolute monsters!" he growled, his fists clenching. Alex reached into his ragged trouser pocket with numb fingers and pulled out a crumpled folded document, handing it over to Joseph. Joseph smoothed out the paper, his eyes scanning the bold clinical lettering from line to line, his face turning pale. "Divorce papers?" Joseph whispered in complete shock. "She gave you this after what they did to you." Alex nodded slowly, a single bitter tear cutting a clean path through the dust on his swollen cheek. "She threw them directly at my face, Joe. She told me to sign them, Pack my pathetic things and get out of her house immediately. No goodbye, no explanation, no remorse. Absolutely nothing. She treated our vows like garbage because I am poor. Joseph placed a firm, heavy hand on Alex's uninjured shoulder, looking deep into his shattered eyes with absolute loyalty and determination. Listen to me, Alex. You will not end like this. I swear on my life, your story does not end in this dirt. You are a profoundly good man, a brilliant engineer, and a brother to me. You are staying right here, and together, we are going to rebuild your life from the absolute ground up. Everything will be fine, I promise you. Just hold on. That night, the two men sat in the quiet living room, the weight of the betrayal hanging heavily in the air. They didn't speak a word, but the silence between them was louder than any scream, forging an unbreakable bond of resilience in the dark. Meanwhile, back at the luxurious estate, completely unbothered by the violence she had unleashed, Gloria sat entirely alone in her grand sitting room, celebrating her cruel victory. The air conditioning was humming perfectly, keeping the massive room at a freezing temperature. She was dressed in a revealing short red designer gown, her face meticulously painted with fresh makeup, her lips shining under the expensive crystal chandeliers. She crossed her long legs elegantly, a look of immense satisfaction and pride radiating from her face. On the glass coffee table sat an expensive bottle of imported red wine. She poured the dark liquid slowly into a crystal goblet, taking a measured, luxurious sip as she leaned back into the plush leather cushions. She picked up her phone, turning on a playlist of soft, triumphant jazz music, a wicked smile spreading across her lips. Good riddance to bad rubbish, she whispered into the empty, opulent room, her voice dripping with venom. Let that broke loser go back to the gutter where he belongs and suffer. I don't need a pathetic, jobless man draining my life and embarrassing my name. I am finally free. She let out a loud, mocking laugh, feeling incredibly powerful and victorious. She truly believed she had won the game, that her wealth made her untouchable, and that her actions would have no consequences. But what her arrogant mind could never comprehend was that the universe was already shifting its gears. The very man she had brutally discarded, the man she had called a worthless failure and had beaten in the dirt, was about to undergo a metamorphic rise from the ashes. And when the wheel of karma finally turned, she would be completely, utterly unprepared for the devastating storm that was heading her way. As the weeks bleeding into months, time passed with a slow, agonizing crawl, but Alex's routine never wavered. He lived in Joseph's modest apartment, waking up every single morning at the crack of dawn, long before the sun hit the city grid. He would open his outdated laptop, sit at the small dining table, and immerse himself in a relentless, obsessive search for engineering contracts. He sent out hundreds of emails, drafted flawless architectural blueprints, made dozens of cold calls to corporate firms, and even walked directly into construction offices downtown, begging for a simple meeting. But the corporate world was cold. Some secretaries promised to call him back with hollow smiles, but the phone remained devastatingly silent. His bank account hovered at absolute zero, forcing him to rely on Joseph for basic meals. But despite the hunger, despite the crushing weight of public rejection, Alex refused to let his spirit break. He didn't beg for handouts, he didn't turn to illegal schemes, and he didn't steal. He simply swallowed his pride, kept his head down, and waited for a single door to crack open. One Saturday evening, the front door burst open, and Joseph came dancing into the apartment, his face illuminated by a massive, triumphant grin. Alex looked up from his blueprints, startled by the sudden burst of energy. "Why on earth are you smiling like you just won the lottery, Joe?" Alex asked, a small smile breaking through his serious demeanor. Joseph threw his car keys onto the table with a loud, dramatic clatter and shouted at the top of his lungs, "I got promoted, bro. I just signed the official documents this afternoon. I am officially the new human resources manager for the entire international conglomerate." Alex jumped to his feet instantly, completely forgetting his own worries, and threw his arms around his friend, hugging him with fierce, genuine brotherhood pride. "Wow, Joe, this is absolutely monumental. I am so incredibly happy for you, my brother. You've earned every single bit of this success." Joseph stepped back, looking at Alex with a deep, scanning seriousness. Are you not sad, Alex? You've been pushing for months and haven't gotten a single break yet while I'm moving up. Honestly, aren't you a little bitter?" Alex looked straight into his friend's eyes, his expression completely pure and devoid of any jealousy. "Why on earth would I be sad or bitter, Joseph? Your win is my win. You took me in when I was bleeding on the street. You fed me when I had nothing. You are my brother, and seeing you rise gives me the strength to keep breathing. Later that night, long after Joseph had gone to bed, Alex quietly knelt by the side of his small mattress in the dark. He clasped his hands tightly, his voice a barely audible emotional whisper in the shadows. God, please, remember me too in this wilderness. I am truly happy for Joseph. He is a good soul. But please, I need help too. I am drowning out here. Just give me one sign that you haven't forgotten me. His voice was faint, but the heavens were listening intensely. The very next morning, Alex put on his last clean, presentable shirt, polished his worn-out shoes, and left the apartment with a heavy heart. He took a cheap local bike ride through the bustling streets and stopped in front of a modest, peaceful church on the outskirts of the city. He stood outside the iron gates for a long time, his nerves threatening to paralyze him, but he knew he was at the end of his rope. He needed spiritual anchor. He walked inside, the quiet sanctuary offering a stark contrast to the chaotic city. He knocked softly on the office door of Pastor John, a wise elderly man who had known Alex since his university days. Pastor John looked up from his open Bible, a warm grandfatherly smile spreading across his face. Alex, it has been far too long, my son. How are you doing? Alex sat down slowly in the wooden chair, his head bowing as the heavy dam of emotional reservation finally broke. Pastor, I am not fine. I am completely broken, Alex whispered. With tears streaming down his face, he poured out his entire soul to the man of God. He told him everything. How Gloria had transformed into a calculating monster. How she had fabricated the domestic abuse lies. How her father had sent armed soldiers to torture him in the dirt. How she had cold-bloodedly thrown divorce papers at his bleeding face before exiling him from his own home. Pastor John's warm face gradually hardened into an expression of deep shock and profound sadness. In a heavy silence for a few long moments, absorbing the sheer cruelty Alex had endured. Then he leaned across the desk, his voice vibrating with absolute spiritual authority. Alex, I am deeply, deeply sorry you had to walk through the valley of the shadow of death. I never saw this extreme wickedness coming from that family. But hear me clearly, young man. God is not sleeping. Karma is a divine law, and those who sow the wind will surely reap the whirlwind. But while you wait for the great doors of engineering to open, you must not remain idle. You must do something with your hands right now. Start small, labor in the vineyard, and watch how the Almighty multiplies your effort. Alex looked at the floor, nodding slowly as the pastor's words offered a tiny spark of light in his dark soul. I understand, sir. I agree completely. But I don't even know where to begin anymore. I am so lost. He leaned back in the chair, covering his face with his rough hands, entirely consumed by the uncertainty of his future. That exact same afternoon, inside the glittering, glass-walled boardroom of the international firm where Joseph worked, a high-stakes executive meeting was underway. The air was thick with corporate tension as top directors and board members sat around a massive marble conference table, reviewing financial portfolios. The company had recently acquired a massive, multi-million-dollar tract of land in a prime development zone, and they were planning to construct a state-of-the-art corporate branch that would serve as their regional headquarters. The managing director stood up at the head of the table, his expression incredibly stern as he tapped a folder. Ladies and gentlemen, this project is the crown jewel of our quarterly expansion. We need an absolute powerhouse to manage this site. Someone who can handle the structural architectural layout, oversee the laborers, manage the massive budget, and deliver results from inception to completion without a single millimeter of error. We do not have the luxury of time, and we certainly do not tolerate mistakes. Who do we have on our roster? The room fell into a heavy, intimidated silence. Several senior project managers looked down at their papers, terrified of taking on such a high-risk, high-pressure responsibility. No one spoke. Then, slowly, deliberately, Joseph raised his hand from the end of the table. The managing director's sharp eyes locked onto him. Yes, Joseph? You're the new HR manager. Do you have a proposal for us? Joseph stood up straight, adjusting his suit jacket, his voice ringing with absolute confidence and loyalty. Sir, I know the exact man for this job. He is not currently on our corporate roster, but he is a brilliant, highly qualified building engineer and architect. Back in our university days, he completely designed and oversaw the construction of our grand faculty hall, a structure that still stands flawlessly today. He is a man of absolute integrity. He knows how to manage thousands of workers under intense pressure, and he is meticulously honest with budgeting. He doesn't need hand-holding, sir. He just needs a single, fair chance to prove his genius to this board. The managing director raised his eyebrows in intrigue, leaning forward. An independent contractor? What is the name of this individual? Joseph smiled proudly, his voice steady. His name is Alex, sir. He is an architect and project manager of the highest order. The boardroom remained completely silent as the directors whispered among themselves. Finally, one of the senior investors spoke up. We typically prefer major, tested corporate firms for projects of this magnitude, Joseph. But, if you are willing to stake your new reputation as HR manager on this man's capability, then bring him in. Let us meet him face to face tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Let's see if his talent matches your praise. Joseph nodded firmly, his heart hammering against his ribs with an intense excitement. Thank you, sir. I will personally ensure he is here. As he sat down, Joseph internally rejoiced, knowing with absolute certainty that the hand of fate had finally provided the perfect golden moment to lift his brother out of the dark abyss. That evening, Joseph couldn't even control his excitement as he drove back to the apartment. He practically burst through the front door, shouting from the hallway before he had even taken off his shoes. Alex! Alex, where are you? Come out here, right now. Alex emerged slowly from the small kitchen, holding a dish towel, wiping his hands with a look of mild confusion. I'm right here, Joe. Calm down, man. What on earth is happening? Is everything okay at the office? Joseph dropped his leather briefcase onto the floor, rushed forward, and grabbed Alex by the shoulders, his eyes wide with a brilliant, frantic joy. Bro! Something completely earth-shattering just happened at the executive board meeting today. Alex looked at him, completely lost. What happened? Did you get another promotion? Joseph shook his head rapidly. No, man, not me. Yo! There is a massive, multi-million-dollar construction project launching at my office. They need a master project manager to design and build a state-of-the-art regional headquarters from scratch. The directors were completely stuck, Alex, so I stood up in front of the entire board and I mentioned your name. I told them about your genius, your integrity, and your designs. Alex completely froze in place, the dish towel slipping from his numb fingers and fluttering to the floor. His jaw dropped, his mind struggling to process the monumental weight of what Joseph was saying. You mentioned me? To an international board of directors? Joseph nodded vigorously, tears of joy welling in his own eyes. Yes, my brother. And they listened to me. They want to see you in the main boardroom tomorrow morning at exactly 9 a.m. They are ready to look at your blueprints, they are ready to talk business, and they are ready to trust you. This is it, Alex. This is the miracle we've been praying for. Alex slowly sank onto the sofa, his legs completely giving out beneath him. His mouth remained open, a sudden, overwhelming wave of emotion washing over his chest as hot, silent tears instantly filled his eyes. He stood up abruptly, threw his arms around Joseph's neck, and hugged his friend with a desperate, crushing intensity, his body shaking with deep sobs of profound gratitude. Thank you. Oh my God, thank you, my brother. Alex wept openly, his voice broken with a beautiful, raw emotion. I thought my life was completely finished, Joe. I thought I was going to die in this poverty and shame, but you remembered me, you saved me. Joseph smiled warmly, blinking back his own tears as he tapped his friend's back with fierce encouragement. Don't thank me, Alex. God has finally remembered you. I am just the vessel. This is your divine time to rise. The wilderness is officially over. Just go into that boardroom tomorrow and show them who you really are. Alex nodded rapidly, wiping his tears away as a fierce, blinding hope suddenly reignited deep within his soul. Whispered, I will not fail, Joe. I swear on my mother's grave, I will not fail this time. He barely slept a single wink that night, not because he was paralyzed by anxiety, but because the cold, suffocating despair had finally left his heart, replaced by a radiant, blinding dawn of hope that was about to change his life forever. The next morning, the city was bathed in a brilliant golden light as Alex woke up, long before his alarm. He moved through the apartment with a silent, sharp focus, his mind clear and locked onto his target. He brushed his teeth, took a long hot bath to wash away the lingering essence of his past trials, and put on his absolute best clothes, a crisp, perfectly ironed plain white shirt, sharp black trousers, and a pair of polished leather shoes that shone like glass under the lights. He stood in front of Joseph's mirror, adjusting his collar, and whispered to his reflection with a voice of absolute iron, Today is the day everything changes. Your pain is your power. He picked up his old leather engineering file. The case was scuffed and worn from years of rejection, but the pristine, Architectural drawings and master structural samples contained within its pockets were absolute gold. Joseph was already waiting outside in his car, the engine idling smoothly. As Alex slid into the passenger seat, Joseph took one look at his friend's sharp, commanding posture and smiled wide. "You look completely ready to conquer the world, my brother." Alex nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "I am, Joe. I am entirely ready. I just pray they have the eyes to see what you see in me." Throughout the drive downtown, a heavy, focused silence filled the vehicle. Alex didn't make small talk. His heart was locked in a deep, continuous prayer, remembering every insult Gloria had thrown at him, every blow the soldiers had dealt him in the dirt, and every door that had been slammed in his face. He was converting his trauma into unyielding ambition. Soon, they arrived at the towering glass skyscraper that served as the conglomerate's headquarters. Joseph led him through the high-security turnstiles and walked him directly to the massive, soundproof executive boardroom on the top floor. 5 distinguished wealthy directors were already seated around the marble table, staring at him with critical, unfeeling corporate eyes. One of the senior directors looked up from his tablet and spoke in a booming tone. "You must be Alex. Welcome." Alex stepped forward gracefully, bowed his head slightly with deep respect, but maintained an intense, steady eye contact that commanded immediate attention. "Yes, distinguished directors, I am Alex. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for granting me this extraordinary opportunity." The chairman of the board leaned forward, crossing his hands. "Joseph here has staked his entire professional reputation on your talent, young man. He claims you are a hidden genius, but we deal in cold, hard numbers and structural reality, not sentiment. Show us what you can actually do." Alex didn't blink. He stepped up to the massive digital projector, opened his scuffed leather file, and began to lay out his master blueprints. The moment he began to speak, his voice transformed into that of a master commander of engineering. For 20 minutes, he held the entire room completely spellbound. He didn't just show them pretty pictures, he explained complex structural physics, demonstrated how his unique architectural layout would cut material costs by 25% while increasing structural load capacity by 40%, and laid out a flawless, day-by-day management timeline that accounted for every single worker, every bag of cement, and every dollar spent. He spoke with a blinding, undeniable confidence, backed by a profound, unassailable respect for the craft. When he finally finished his presentation, the boardroom fell into a dead, stunned silence. The directors looked at each other, their critical expressions completely melting into absolute awe. The managing director in the center leaned back, exchanged a profound nod with the investors, and turned his gaze back to Alex, a genuine smile breaking across his face. "Alex, we have interviewed 10 of the biggest construction firms in this country over the past month, but your design, your financial transparency, and your sheer brilliance put them all to absolute shame. We like what we see, and we love what we hear. The search is over. We are officially awarding this entire regional project to you." Alex's heart leaped into his throat, an overwhelming surge of electricity shooting through his veins, but he forced his body to remain calm. The director continued, "It is a massive, high-profile project. We want a fully integrated corporate tower, automated office spaces, dual underground parking garages, a massive industrial generator house, and state-of-the-art security installations. The full execution plan is inside this executive folder. This contract, Alex, is officially valued at over $700,000. Alex reached out and accepted the heavy leather folder, his hands shaking slightly from the sheer earth-shattering magnitude of the moment. He turned his head and looked at Joseph, who was standing by the door, tears of absolute triumph running down his face as he nodded firmly. Alex swallowed the lump of raw emotion in his throat, looked back at the board, and said in a voice thick with determination, "Thank you, distinguished directors. I swear to you, I will not fail your trust. I will build you a masterpiece." The construction project launched the very next week, and Alex practically lived on the building site, pouring every single ounce of his soul, energy, and intellect into the earth. He worked day and night, navigating the dust and the scorching heat with a brilliant, untiring focus. He proved to be a master leader. He paid every single laborer on time, ensured maximum safety regulations on site, and personally inspected every steel beam and concrete mixture. Under his meticulous guidance, the massive corporate tower rose from the dust with breathtaking speed, emerging as a stunning, ultra-modern masterpiece of glass and reinforced concrete that turned heads across the city. The international conglomerate was so thoroughly blown away by his flawless execution and early delivery that the board of directors held an emergency meeting and awarded him a massive, unprecedented financial thank you bonus of $50,000. But that spectacular victory was merely the opening chapter of his sudden meteoric rise. 2 weeks later, another massive oil conglomerate called his phone. "Are you the brilliant independent engineer who just constructed that magnificent glass tower downtown?" the executive asked. Alex smiled gently, his voice calm. "Yes, sir, that was my project." "We want you to design our new refinery headquarters immediately," the voice replied. Then another multimillionaire developer called him, then another, then a major international school board. Word of his unparalleled genius, absolute transparency, and rapid delivery spread through the elite corporate circles like a wildfire. In the span of just 5 short months, Alex transformed from an unemployed, abused outcast into one of the most sought-after, highly trusted, and wealthy building engineers in the entire state of Lagos. He moved out of the cramped spaces of his past and purchased a jaw-dropping, ultra-luxury multi-million-dollar mansion in the exclusive, heavily guarded neighborhood of Lekki. He also walked into a high-end dealership and bought a brand-new, top-of-the-line black luxury SUV that commanded absolute respect on every road it touched. One bright morning, Alex stood on the massive, marble-tiled balcony of his new mansion, looking down at the heavy silver keys resting in his palm. The warm morning breeze brushed against his face as he looked out over his manicured lawns. He let out a long, emotional breath, a slow, profound smile breaking across his handsome face. I vividly remember the horrific days when I had absolutely nothing," he whispered to himself, his voice thick with the memory of his pain. "I remember weeping bitterly in the dirt of the barracks, wondering if God had abandoned me. Now look at me." But wealth did not corrupt the purity of his heart. He used a substantial portion of his massive earnings to open a grand, state-of-the-art corporate engineering firm downtown. He hired an elite team, but for his very first junior assistant position, he deliberately selected a young, struggling engineering graduate who had been rejected by dozens of firms, a young man who reminded Alex precisely of the vulnerable soul he used to be. Alex was no longer the broke, helpless victim who could be spat on and dragged into the dirt by arrogant billionaires. He was now a titan in his own right, a powerful, wealthy master of industry whom the entire elite society was desperately begging to meet. It was a bright, shimmering Friday afternoon, and Alex was sitting comfortably in his massive, beautifully designed executive office, reviewing complex development layouts on a state-of-the-art digital desk. The powerful air conditioning was blowing a gentle, refreshing breeze through the room, which smelled heavily of rich leather and expensive mahogany wood. Suddenly, a soft, polite knock rattled his double-glass doors. Alex looked up from his blueprints, a warm expression to his face. "Come in, please." The heavy door swung open slowly and Joseph stepped into the room, dressed in a sharp executive suit of his own. Alex stood up instantly, a massive, bright smile illuminating his face. "My brother, the man who held the light," he shouted joyfully across the room. They walked toward each other, executing a powerful, intricate brotherhood handshake, like two young boys who had just conquered the biggest tournament of their lives, before bursting into a loud, echoing laughter. "My goodness, Alex, this office is absolutely spectacular," Joseph exclaimed, spinning around to take in the panoramic glass windows that overlooked the entire glittering city skyline. "It's beautiful, man." Alex looked at his friend, his eyes filled with a deep emotional seriousness. "Every single brick of this office, every single dollar in my bank account, Joe. It was your unyielding faith and your prayers that built it. You saved my life." Joseph smiled warmly, shaking his head slowly as they sat down in the plush leather chairs. They spent the next hour laughing and reminiscing about the dark, desperate days when they were sharing cheap snacks and struggling to pay basic bills, marveling at the incredible hand of fate. Joseph leaned forward across the desk, his expression turning sharp and analytical. "You've come an incredibly long way in a short time, Alex, but if you think this is your peak, you are severely mistaken. You are just getting started, my brother." Alex raised a curious eyebrow, leaning back. "What do you mean by that, Joe? I'm handling 4 major tower contracts right now." Joseph smiled a knowing, brilliant corporate smile. "You are building houses for other people, Alex. Why on earth aren't you entering the real estate market proper? Why build for developers when you can become the developer?" Alex remained completely quiet for a long moment, his engineering mind instantly calculating the massive potential of his friend's words. Real estate proper? Buying the land, developing the estates, and controlling the market, Alex murmured, his eyes narrowing. Joseph laughed loudly, slapping the desk. Exactly, man. It's not far from what you're already doing, but the profit margins are astronomical. You buy massive tracts of land, divide them, sell them to the elite, or build luxury estates and lease them out to multinational firms. That is where the real, permanent, generational wealth sits. It's an absolute goldmine for a man with your reputation. Alex nodded slowly, a profound, sharp ambition igniting in his eyes as he absorbed the strategy. They talked for hours, drafting preliminary expansion plans. When Joseph finally stood up to leave, he turned at the grand double doors, winked at his friend, and said, "This is merely the foundation, Alex. Watch what the universe does next." Alex walked over to the massive floor-to-ceiling glass window after Joseph left. He stood there with his hands clasped behind his back, looking down at the sprawling, chaotic, and wealthy city of Lagos stretching out beneath him. For the first time in his entire life, he didn't just see a city of struggles. He saw a vast, endless landscape of land, buildings, and an empire that belonged to him. 2 weeks flew by in a blur of intense corporate restructuring. Then, on a quiet, sunlit Monday morning, Alex picked up his phone and dialed his private wealth bank manager. "Good morning, sir," Alex said, his tone commanding absolute priority. "I want to immediately liquidate a portion of my investment capital and purchase substantial, controlling shares in 3 of the largest, most powerful real estate development corporations in this country." On the other end of the line, the bank manager's breath caught in his throat, a look of profound shock crossing his face as he checked Alex's massive account balance. "Sir, that is an incredibly aggressive, brilliant power move. It will instantly position you as a major stakeholder in the national property market. Would you like me to expedite the paperwork through our legal department?" "Yes," Alex replied with absolute finality, "to expedite it and ensure it is completely finalized by the end of this current week." By the time Friday afternoon arrived, the transactions were fully executed, and Alex's name was officially registered as a major, high-profile shareholder in the country's elite real estate giants. The corporate world shook slightly at the sudden intrusion of this new titan. The very next morning, the chief executive officer of one of the real estate companies called Alex's private line directly, his tone brimming with immense respect. "Engineer Alex, welcome aboard our corporate family. We saw your massive share acquisition in our system, and frankly, we have been admiring your spectacular engineering work from afar for months. Listen, we just acquired a massive, multi-million-dollar luxury estate project in the ultra-prime zone of Akija. We need a partner with your exact brilliance to oversee the entire development. Are you interested in partnering with us?" Alex smiled a slow, victorious smile, leaning back in his executive chair. "Yes, CEO, I am highly interested. Let's draft the partnership terms." The next day, a second massive firm called him, begging for a joint venture, then a third. The most powerful, wealthy tycoons in the city were now desperately dialing his number, seeking his approval and his partnership. Alex's name had become an elite brand, a golden seal of absolute success, and his corporate bank accounts were expanding at an astronomical rate, transforming him into an unstoppable force of hidden wealth. Meanwhile, entirely removed from the grand boardrooms and the glittering success of the city, a dark, heavy cloud of depression had settled over Gloria's life. It was a quiet, suffocating afternoon, and she sat entirely alone in her dark living room. The heavy, expensive curtains were pulled tightly shut, blocking out every single ray of the beautiful sun. The television was turned off, leaving the room in an eerie, ghostly silence. A cold, untouched cup of herbal tea sat on the glass table beside her, gathering dust. Gloria looked completely unrecognizable from the proud, radiant bride of 2 years ago. Her eyes were dull, bloodshot, and surrounded by heavy, dark circles from months of agonizing sleeplessness. She looked profoundly tired, her soul draining away in the empty mansion. Suddenly, the sharp, jarring ring of her mobile phone shattered the silence. She picked it up with a slow, numb movement, pressing it to her ear. "Hello, Daddy," she said, her voice weak and lifeless. Her father's voice came through the speaker, but it lacked his usual corporate authority. Instead, Mr. Jerry's voice sounded incredibly sharp, stressed, and heavy with a desperate anxiety. "Gloria, listen to me," her father said, his breath coming in short, strained gasps. "It has been 2 whole years since your divorce from that boy. 2 years, Gloria. Where on earth is your husband? Where is my grandchild? Where is the family legacy? Gloria rolled her eyes in deep irritation, a wave of familiar annoyance washing over her. Daddy, please, I beg of you, do not start this exhausting conversation with me again today. I am not in the mood. I am getting old, Gloria, Mr. Jerry shouted back, his voice cracking with an underlying panic that startled her. The family line is stagnant. I need to hold my grandchild in my arms before I close my eyes and die. You threw your marriage away, and now you sit in that empty house doing nothing. Daddy, stop it. Just stop. Gloria raised her voice hysterically, her emotions boiling over. Without waiting for him to reply, she slammed the end call button, throwing the phone violently onto the armchair beside her. She leaned her head back against the couch, panting heavily as tears of raw frustration and a hidden, terrifying emotion pricked her eyes. That hidden emotion was regret. For the past year, the high society friends she had tried so hard to impress had gradually distanced themselves from her, finding her bitter divorce and her father's increasingly erratic behavior unappealing. She looked around her massive, perfectly neat and expensive house. Everything was beautifully designed, yes, but she was not fine. Not at all. A profound, echoing emptiness filled her life, a haunting realization that she had thrown away the only man who had ever genuinely loved her for her soul, leaving her trapped in a golden cage of her own making, completely blind to the fact that her entire world was about to violently collapse into absolute ruin. The following evening, the darkness that enveloped Gloria's bedroom felt heavier than usual, a thick, suffocating blanket of isolation that made it impossible for her to sleep. She lay flat on her back, her eyes wide open, staring blankly at the shadows stretching across the ceiling. Her mind kept spinning in a relentless cycle of bitter memories and unfulfilled expectations. Suddenly, the sharp, jarring ring of her phone broke the silence, vibrating violently against the glass of her nightstand. She reached for it quickly, assuming it was her father calling back to continue his relentless lecture. But as her eyes focused on the screen, she realized it wasn't Mr. Jerry. It was his leave-in housemaid, a woman who had served their family for over a decade. Gloria pressed the phone to her ear, a sudden spike of anxiety tightening her chest. "Hello? Mary, what is it?" Gloria asked, her voice sharp with apprehension. The woman's voice came through the speaker in a frantic, hyperventilating rush, thick with terror and weeping. "Madam Gloria, please, you need to come down to the family estate right now. Come quick. Your father, Mr. Jerry, he just collapsed out of nowhere. He fainted right in the middle of the living room. We are lifting him into the car right now, rushing him straight to the St. Jude's Specialized Hospital." Gloria sat up in bed instantly, her heart slamming against her ribs like a trapped animal. What on earth do you mean he collapsed? What happened to him?" "I don't know, madam. I don't know," the maid wailed through the phone. "He was just sitting at his desk talking on a business call, looking incredibly stressed. And then he just clutched his chest and fell heavily to the floor. He is completely unresponsive, madam. He isn't breathing properly. Please, just come to the hospital immediately." Gloria jumped out of bed, her entire body shaking violently as an icy dread seized her soul. She didn't even bother to change out of her pajamas. She simply grabbed her car keys with numb, fumbling fingers and ran out of the house into the freezing night air. She threw herself into the driver's seat of her luxury vehicle, her hands trembling so hard she could barely slot the key into the ignition. As the engine roared to life and she tore out of the grand gates, a desperate, hysterical panic overtook her and she began to pray aloud, her tears blinding her vision as she swerved onto the main road. "Please, God, no, not right now. Please, don't take my father away from me. He is all I have left in this world. Please, spare his life." She pressed her foot firmly down on the accelerator, her tires screeching through the empty, desolate city streets. The image of her father's stern, all-powerful face flashed through her mind, juxtaposed with the maid's terrifying screams. She drove faster and faster, completely blind to the fact that the fragile foundation of her privileged life was already crumbling into dust. Gloria rushed through the sliding glass doors of the specialized hospital, the harsh smell of antiseptic hitting her nose as she ran, nearly tripping over her own feet. She didn't care that she hadn't parked her luxury vehicle properly. She left it idling in the emergency bay. She descended upon the front reception desk like a madwoman, slamming her palms onto the counter. "Please, where's my father, Mr. Jerry? They just brought him here by ambulance a few minutes ago. Tell me where he is." The receptionist looked up, startled by her hysterical state, and tried to speak in a calm, practiced tone. Calm down, madam. Please take a seat. The medical team is currently working on him in the intensive care unit. Just then, a heavy wooden door at the end of the corridor swung open, and a senior cardiologist stepped out into the hallway. He pulled off his surgical mask, his face entirely grim, stripped of any professional optimism. He walked slowly, deliberately toward Gloria, his heavy footsteps echoing in the quiet corridor. Gloria ran to meet him, grabbing the sleeves of his white lab coat. "Doctor, please, tell me he's okay. I'm Gloria, his only daughter. Can I go in and see him?" The doctor looked down at the floor for a long, agonizing second, a profound pity in his eyes, before looking back up to deliver the devastating blow. "I am so deeply sorry, Madam Gloria. Your father, he didn't make it. He suffered a massive, catastrophic myocardial infarction, a total heart attack. The damage to his cardiac muscle was absolute. He was brought into our facility far too late, and his body was already entering a state of shock. We administered every advanced life support protocol available, but his heart simply refused to restart. I am so sorry for your profound loss." The words cut through the air like a guillotine. Everything around Gloria went dead silent. The bright fluorescent lights of the hospital hallway seemed to spin violently out of control, and the air left her lungs entirely. Her knees buckled beneath her weight, turning to water as she collapsed heavily onto the cold linoleum floor, letting out a primal blood-curdling shriek of pure agony that echoed through the entire hospital wing. "No! Daddy, no! You cannot leave me like this. You promised me you would never leave me. Come back. Please, come back." Two nurses rushed forward, wrapping their arms around her trembling frame, trying to lift her from the floor, but Gloria's body felt completely hollow, empty, and devoid of life. She sobbed uncontrollably, her face pressed against the cold floor, realizing with a terrifying clarity that she was now completely, utterly alone in a brutal world, with no father to protect her, no husband to hold her hand, and no one to shield her from the storm that was brewing on the horizon. Jerry's funeral was a massive, high-profile spectacle, an opulent gathering that perfectly reflected the immense wealth and corporate prestige he had commanded throughout his lifetime. Hundreds of elite high society guests flooded the grand cemetery ground, dressed in impeccable black designer suits and expensive mourning gowns. Long lines of shiny black luxury cars stretched down the road, and towering, extravagant floral arrangements of imported black and white orchids covered the entire burial site. Photographers from major corporate magazines stood at a distance, their camera lenses clicking continuously to document the passing of an industry titan. Yet, despite the massive crowd and the overwhelming displays of wealth, Gloria saw absolutely none of it. She sat entirely isolated under a grand white canopy, dressed in a heavy black mourning veil, her face pale, drawn, and completely hollow. Her tears had dried into crusty tracks on her cheeks, her eyes fixed blankly on the expensive mahogany casket containing the only person who had ever provided her with security. Elite business associates and wealthy socialites stepped up to her, one by one, offering robotic, superficial words of condolence, but Gloria didn't even have the energy to nod her head in acknowledgement. Her heart was shattered into a million unfixable pieces. Later that evening, the crowd finally dispersed, leaving her to return to her father's grand estate, the sprawling mansion that she now considered her sole inheritance and sanctuary. But the moment her car pulled up to the massive wrought iron gates, her headlights illuminated two men standing on the gravel driveway. They were dressed in sharp, identical black corporate suits, and the taller man was holding a thick, ominous brown leather folder under his arm. Gloria frowned, rolling down her window as she stopped the vehicle, her voice thick with exhaustion and irritation. "Good evening. Who are you? And what on earth are you doing on my father's private property on the day of his burial?" The taller man stepped forward, pulling a gold-embossed credential card from his pocket. "Good evening, Madam Gloria. We are senior legal recovery agents from Platinum Loans and Asset Management Limited." Gloria's brow furrowed, a sudden cold knot of apprehension tightening in her stomach. "Platinum Loans? I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. My father doesn't owe anyone. Please leave immediately." The agent didn't flinch. He slowly opened the heavy brown folder, pulling out a stack of legally certified financial documents. "We are incredibly sorry to intrude on your day of grief, madam, but business parameters wait for no one. Your late father, Mr. Jerry, took out an astronomical, high-interest corporate bailout loan exactly 5 years ago to keep Jerrycon Engineering afloat during a massive market crash. According to these legally binding deeds, He utilized all of his personal real estate properties, his entire stock portfolio, and even the corporate headquarters of Jerrycon Engineering as primary collateral. Gloria's mouth opened wide in absolute, paralyzed shock, her face draining of all color. What? No, no, that is an absolute lie. My father was a billionaire. He would never risk his entire empire on a loan. The agent handed the papers through the window, his voice completely unfeeling. The documents do not lie, Madam Gloria. Look at his signature on every page. Because the principal amount has remained entirely unpaid for years, and now that the primary guarantor has passed away, our corporation is officially exercising our legal right to foreclose on all collateral. You have exactly 7 business days to completely liquidate the debt, or every single asset, including your father's company and his main residential estates, will be permanently seized and taken over by Platinum Loans Limited. He turned around, walking back to his car with his colleague, leaving Gloria sitting frozen in her driver's seat, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold the steering wheel. She looked down at the documents, the cold corporate text blurring before her eyes as a fresh wave of hysterical tears spilled over. The grand illusion of her inherited wealth had vanished in an instant, leaving her staring into a terrifying abyss of impending ruin. The next morning, driven by a desperate, frantic need to salvage whatever remained of her life, Gloria marched directly into the sprawling corporate headquarters of Platinum Loans Limited. Her eyes were bloodshot from a completely sleepless night, her hair unkempt, and her designer clothes wrinkled. She was completely stripped of her usual aristocratic arrogance as she sat across the desk from the chief managing director of the firm, her voice trembling, reduced to a soft pleading whisper. Please, I beg of you, sir, just grant me a little more time. Just give me a 6-month extension to audit my father's records. My father didn't mean to default on your firm. He was dealing with severe health issues and corporate stress. You cannot simply take away everything he spent 35 years building in a single day. The managing director leaned back in his leather chair, looking at her with cold, clinical corporate eyes, completely unmoved by her emotional desperation. Madam Gloria, he spoke, his voice flat and unyielding, we are a multi-billion-dollar financial institution, not a charity organization. Your father signed these cross-collateralization deeds with his own hand. He fully understood the risks. He put up Jerrycon Engineering, his prime residential mansions, and his entire luxury share portfolio as backup for a massive capital injection. That transaction occurred half a decade ago. Gloria shook her head rapidly, her voice rising in a hysterical pitch. But he never told me. I am his right-hand assistant, his only child. Why did your company never send us an official warning? The director opened a metal drawer, pulling out a thick logbook and placing it firmly on the desk before her. Look at the record, madam. We sent exactly 24 certified legal notices to your family estate over the past 3 years. Every single one of them was received and signed for by your father's private secretary. Your father chose to hide the financial bleeding from you to protect his pride. Now he is gone, and the grace period has officially expired. We have already legally assumed total ownership of Jerrycon Engineering. The company is no longer yours, Gloria. It belongs to us now. Gloria stared at the logbook, her mind completely fracturing as the absolute reality of her poverty set in. No, please, this isn't fair. This is my birthright. The director closed the folder with a definitive snap. We are putting Jerrycon Engineering and all its auxiliary assets up for public corporate auction next week to recover our capital. The notice is already in the national newspapers. Good day, Madam Gloria. Gloria stood up slowly, her legs shaking so badly she had to hold on to the edge of the desk to keep from collapsing. She stumbled out of the high-rise building like a zombie, stepping into the chaotic city air. She looked up at the vast, uncaring sky and whispered through her tears, Daddy, why did you do this to me? Why did you leave me completely helpless? But there was no answer from the heavens, only the loud, mocking roar of the city traffic. 1 week later, the grand corporate auction hall downtown was packed to absolute capacity with the most powerful, wealthy business moguls, elite developers, and corporate investors in the country. The air was buzzing with an intense high-stakes energy as multi-millionaires in designer suits discussed bidding strategies, and news reporters with flashing cameras lined the back wall. Papers detailing asset valuations were passed around continuously. Gloria sat completely hidden in the very last row, huddled near a side exit door, wearing a heavy dark jacket with a hood pulled over her face so no one would recognize her. Her heart was hammering violently against her ribs, her eyes wide and fixed on the grand stage at the front of the hall. That stage held the fate of Jerrycon Engineering, the proud, massive company her father had dedicated his entire adult life to constructing. Now it was being picked apart by corporate vultures. The official auctioneer stepped up to the podium, tapping the microphone to silence the wealthy crowd. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished investors. Welcome to the Platinum Loans liquidation auction. Today we are opening the bidding for the entire corporate entity known as Jerrycon Engineering. This premium acquisition includes 3 prime multi-story office buildings downtown, 2 massive industrial warehouses, 2 luxury residential structures, and a complete staff infrastructure of over 350 highly trained personnel. The corporate valuation is immense. We are officially opening the bidding at a baseline price of $500,000. Do I hear 500? Immediately, a wealthy investor in the front row raised his paddle. 500,000. I have 500. Do I hear 550? The auctioneer barked into the microphone. Another hand shot up in the middle row. 550,000. 600,000. Another voice shouted from the left. The numbers began to climb at a terrifying rapid pace, the wealthy elite throwing out fortunes as if it were pocket change. 700,000. 720,000. Gloria felt a wave of intense physical sickness wash over her stomach, covering her mouth with her trembling hand to suppress a sob. She closed her eyes tightly, wishing with everything inside her that she could wake up from this horrific nightmare. 800,000, the auctioneer yelled, his eyes scanning the room. $1 million, a major corporate developer shouted, causing a collective gasp to ripple through the audience. The auctioneer raised his gavel high. I have $1 million from the front row, going once at 1 million, going twice. Suddenly, a deep, calm, and utterly commanding voice cut through the chaotic noise from the center aisle, vibrating with an absolute, unshakable authority. $1.2 million. The entire auction hall went completely, shockingly dead silent. Every single head in the room turned in unison to look at the man who had just delivered the monumental bid. The auctioneer blinked in surprise, leaning forward over his podium. I have a new bid of $1.2 million, going once at $1.2 million, going twice. Sold. He slammed his wooden gavel down with a loud, definitive bang that echoed like a gunshot through the room. Sold to the gentleman in the center, representing Alex Engineering and Real Estate Limited. Gloria's eyes flew open wide, her breath catching in her throat as her brain completely short-circuited. Alex, she whispered, her voice cracking in absolute paralyzed disbelief. No, it's impossible. It cannot be him. She stood up from her hidden seat by the side door, her body moving mechanically as she stepped into the aisle to get a clearer view. There, walking gracefully down the center carpet toward the stage, was her ex-husband. Alex looked absolutely spectacular, radiating an aura of immense, undeniable wealth and unshakable confidence. He was dressed in a flawless, custom-tailored navy blue 3-piece suit that cost more than her current annual living expenses, his hair neatly styled, his posture perfectly straight and regal. He carried himself with the quiet dignity of a true king of industry, a stark contrast to the broken, bleeding man who had been dragged into the dirt of the barracks 2 years ago. Joseph walked proudly beside him, carrying a leather briefcase. Alex stepped up to the stage, shook hands firmly with the legal directors of Platinum Loans, and smoothly signed the master acquisition documents with a gold pen. He was now the absolute official owner of Jerrycon Engineering, the man who possessed everything her father had ever built. Gloria held her chest, her lungs refusing to take in oxygen as a profound, dizzying panic overtook her mind. Everything felt like a cruel, surreal movie, but the reality was absolute. The very man she had brutally spat on, insulted, and kicked out of her house because he was poor, had just bought her family's entire legacy with a single sentence, and she was left standing in the shadows, entirely broke, watching his absolute triumph unfold. After the high-stakes auction concluded and the wealthy crowd began to file out of the grand hall, Gloria stood frozen outside the main double doors, her body trembling under the weight of an intense, chaotic mix of shame, regret, and desperation. Her eyes remained locked on the exit, until finally the glass doors swung open and Alex walked out, flanked by his legal team, holding the official ownership folder in his hands. Gloria took a deep, shaky breath and stepped directly into his path, blocking his way. Alex, please wait, she cried out, her voice cracking with an immense emotional strain. Alex stopped instantly, his security detail moving to step in front of him, but he raised a single calm hand to wave them back. He looked down at her, his expression entirely serene, quiet, and completely devoid of the anger or vulnerability he used to carry. He looked at her as if she were a complete stranger. "Good afternoon, Gloria," he said, his voice a deep, resonant hum. Gloria swallowed hard, her eyes filling with fresh tears as she gestured wildly to the corporate documents in his hand. You bought my father's company, Alex. Why on earth would you do this? After everything that transpired between us? After the horrific way our marriage ended? Why would you return to buy his company? Is this your sick way of getting revenge? Did you do this just to mock my misery?" Alex looked at her for a long, heavy moment, a profound philosophical calm in his eyes that made her feel incredibly small. He slowly handed his briefcase to Joseph, stepped closer to her, and spoke in a low, firm tone that vibrated with absolute truth. "Gloria, your father was a man who let his immense wealth blinding his humanity. He looked down on me from his high tower. He treated me like absolute trash because my pockets were empty. And he didn't hesitate to send armed military soldiers to brutally beat and torture an innocent man just to satisfy his pride. He looked at me as if I were a disease." Gloria lowered her head, unable to meet his piercing gaze, her hands shaking with a profound shame. I know," she whispered. "But I did not execute this purchase out of a petty desire for revenge, Gloria," Alex continued, his voice steady and calm. "My return to this space has absolutely nothing to do with mocking your poverty or celebrating your downfall. I do not operate on hatred. I bought this company because, over the past 2 years, while you were sitting in luxury, I was working myself to the bone. I studied, I labored, I sacrificed, and I grew into a position of ultimate financial capability. When my intelligence network informed me that Jerrycon Engineering was collapsing into bankruptcy and default, I didn't see a target for anger. I saw a brilliant established business that could be systematically saved from total liquidation. I saw a company with over 300 dedicated, innocent staff members who were about to lose their livelihoods and fail to feed their families because of your father's financial recklessness. I bought this corporation because I possessed the capital and the structural genius to save it, not because I wanted to hurt you." He paused, taking a slow breath as he looked at her wrinkled clothes and tear-stained face. "But I will not stand here and lie to you, Gloria. It still feels incredibly strange, a profound twist of fate, to stand on this polished marble floor and watch you look up at me with the exact same eyes of desperation that I once turned toward you when you threw me out into the cold." Gloria's voice shook violently, a heavy sob escaping her throat. I am so sorry, Alex. I didn't know. I had absolutely no idea that things would ever turn out like this." Alex gave her a small, melancholy smile, shaking his head slowly. "Nobody ever knows what tomorrow holds, Gloria. That is the grand, beautiful, and terrifying lesson of human existence. That is exactly why you must treat every single human being you encounter with absolute dignity and profound respect, whether they are a broke beggar in the gutter or a billionaire in a high-rise office tower. Because the wheel of fate is always turning." He turned around gracefully, walking away down the corridor toward his waiting luxury black SUV. Joseph opened the door for him, and Alex slid into the leather interior, the vehicle smoothly pulling away from the curb and vanishing into the bustling city. Gloria stood entirely alone on the concrete pavement, the dust from his tires settling around her worn-out shoes. She had nothing left. No job, no corporate status, no father, no husband, and absolutely no one to blame for her catastrophic ruin but her own arrogant, materialistic heart. Her family's empire was permanently gone. The pure man who had loved her with his whole soul was gone, and all she was left with was the crushing weight of her karma and a long, painful road to rebuild her life from absolute zero. The great wheel of fate had spun its full circle, and the dust of the chaotic battle had finally settled over the city, leaving behind an absolute, unshakable demonstration of divine justice. For Alex, life had transformed into a glorious, breathtaking reality that completely overshadowed the dark ghosts of his past. He was no longer the invisible, bleeding young man pleading for a crumb of respect in a cold world. He was now the undisputed, highly celebrated chief executive officer of the newly restructured Alex Engineering and Real Estate conglomerate. He walked through the grand corporate corridors of the very company that used to belong to his tormentor. But the toxic cloud of nepotism and arrogance that once defined Jerrycon Engineering had been entirely dismantled, replaced by an atmosphere of profound respect, creative brilliance, and absolute meritocracy. Alex ran his empire with a deep, compassionate wisdom born from his own suffering. He routinely walked the active building sites not to terrify his laborers, but to shake their dust-covered hands, to look into their eyes, and to ensure that every single worker under his employment was paid a highly dignified, abundant wage on perfect schedule. He established a massive, multi-million-dollar foundation dedicated exclusively to providing fully paid university scholarships for brilliant but impoverished architectural students, ensuring that no young mind would ever have their professional dreams crushed simply because their pockets were empty. His partnership with Joseph grew into a legendary force in the business world, with the two childhood friends sitting at the absolute pinnacle of the real estate market. Their bond forged in the fires of adversity and sealed with an unyielding loyalty that money could never corrupt. Alex had risen to a height where his wealth was matching only by the profound humility of his soul, a shining beacon of light to anyone trapped in the trenches of despair, in stark, devastating contrast to his magnificent ascension. Harsh and unyielding karma had completely descended upon Gloria, tearing away the fragile, superficial foundation of her entire existence. Stripped of her father's corporate shield and completely devoid of any marketable professional skills, she quickly found herself utterly cast out of the elite high society circles that she had once sacrificed her marriage to impress. The very friends who used to drink her expensive wine and laugh at her arrogant jokes now completely blocked her telephone number, turning their heads in disgust whenever they passed her on the street, viewing her rapid slide into poverty as a social contamination. Within a matter of months, the crushing weight of utility bills, property taxes, and outstanding personal debts forced her to sell the final asset she possessed, the modest residential house she lived in. She was forced to pack her expensive designer clothes, which had now gone completely out of style, into worn-out suitcases, and move into a small, dilapidated one-room apartment on the far, dusty outskirts of the city, a place where the ceiling fan barely turned and the walls were cracked and cold. She was forced to seek a low-paying, exhausting position as a basic sales clerk in a local retail market, her long, shiny chrome nails a distant memory, replaced by hands that were rough from manual labor. Every single evening as she returned to her dark, cramped room, she would sit on the edge of her cheap mattress, staring blankly at the fading reflection in her small mirror, completely consumed by an agonizing, suffocating cloud of absolute regret. She realized with a terrifying, permanent clarity that she had possessed a king, a man of pure gold who would have conquered the world just to lay it at her feet. But her blind, materialistic greed had driven her to spit on him and exile him into the dirt, leaving her with absolutely nothing but the hollow, haunting echoes of her own cruelty. This earth-shattering, deeply emotional story leaves us with a profound, unshakable philosophical lesson that every single human being watching this video must permanently engrave into their heart. Never, under any circumstances, look down on a human being simply because their pockets are empty today, and never measure the absolute worth of a soul by the current state of their financial balance. The world we live in is highly unpredictable, a volatile landscape where the tides of fortune can completely reverse in a single fraction of a second. Wealth is a fleeting, shifting shadow that can vanish overnight, but integrity, brilliance, and a fundamentally good heart are the only permanent currencies that hold true value in the eyes of the universe. The very person you arrogantly reject, humiliate, and treat like garbage today because of their temporary struggle may very well be the exact same person whose grace, assistance, and mercy you will desperately depend upon tomorrow. Treat every single individual you encounter on your life's journey with a deep, unyielding love, absolute kindness, and profound respect, whether they are a broke laborer sweating in the dirt or a powerful tycoon sitting in a glass high-rise. Karma is a divine, unescapable law of human existence. It does not sleep, it does not take bribes, and it will systematically ensure that you reap precisely what you sow into the lives of others. Now I want to hear directly from you, our incredible and deeply valued audience. What specific part of this shocking, deeply emotional story touched your soul the most? Were you moved by the unyielding loyalty of Joseph? Or did you find a powerful lesson in the spectacular, triumphant rise of Alex? Please, share your raw, honest thoughts and life experiences in the comment section down below. I am incredibly eager to read every single one of your perspectives. And please, do not wander far from this channel, because we have another extraordinarily captivating, highly intriguing, and profoundly powerful life story that is already heading your way in just a few days. A narrative that will completely blow your mind. So, right now, click that big subscribe button, hit the like button to support our work, and turn on your notification bell so you will be the absolute first to know